I'm Alan Wardis, and you're listening to ThinkRadio.
If you're listening to this, you can get on Google and just type in the words, fights at fast food restaurants. And we're not getting in fights because, we got 4 chicken nuggets instead of 5. It's happening because we're so tightly wound.
That's Eric Eaton, keynote speaker and author of the Thrival Guide, a look at how to do more than just survive and get the most out of your life. Join us on this episode of ThinkRadio.
ThinkRadio is supported by the Gunnison Country Times, Gunnison's locally owned hometown newspaper, and by listeners like you. To find out how you can become a ThinkRadio supporter, visit kbut.org.
Eric, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Alan. It's good to be here.
I want to start off by telling you that I really love the title of your book, The Thrival Guide, because, the bookshelves are packed with survival guides. We got survival guides for everything. Terrorism, traffic, parenting, you name it, right?
Right.
But right up front in the title of your book, you're suggesting that there's a big difference between just surviving when it comes to life and thriving. What do you mean by that? Why do you see a difference in those two words and those two approaches to life?
Yeah, it was interesting in kind of doing the research for the book. And, I started looking at all these survival books that are out there. And we can survive anything. Like there's even handbooks on zombie apocalypse if you want to figure out the best thing to do.
Right, which is very important.
It is true. So you never know. But with all these books, we've turned something that used to just be life into a specialized survival skill. And when you look at our modern life, too many times we've turned this surviving method or survival mode into a way of living when there really should be more out there than just surviving. We should all be thriving in no matter what we're doing. And so I wanted to create a guidebook in showing people that there are a lot of distractions in our life, and we need to understand those if we are going to thrive in this life.
And define for us thriving as opposed to just surviving. What do you mean when you say we are designed to thrive, not just survive?
Now, on a basic level, it's just living an abundant life on your terms, living the life that you dream or you think of or you want to live. And in the book, I call it an adventure. What's the adventure that's on your heart that you want to live out? But we've let too much of life get in the way of those adventures. So how do we create the adventures and remove the things that are keeping us from that in order for us to thrive?
Well, so the word adventure sounds like fun. And I think a lot of people would say, well, life is not supposed to be fun. Life is you do what you have to do to get by. But you're suggesting that that's not true.
I don't think it is, but, think about, do you hike or mountain bike or something like that? So when you go on a hike, is it all fun or is some of it work?
Right. You got to go up to come down. Right?
Yeah. Some of it can be, very challenging, can be a lot of work. But is it going to be easy? By no means will it be easy. But we let the attitude or the defeatist mechanism of society kind of take us down the first time we fail or the first time we fall instead of fighting through. It can be drudging us sometimes, can be painful, can be hard. But the point is to get to where you want to be and to accomplish something greater than you probably would have otherwise. And that sense of pride we can have within us instead of just, at the first rock or the first time the path changes, just curling up into a ball and just crying because it didn't turn out the way you thought it would. And I think that's kind of what the mentality many of us have in our society is giving up too easy instead of doing what you can in order to live the life that you've always dreamed.
Well, yeah, and reclaiming the idea that you should be able to live the life you've dreamed.
Absolutely.
Right? Because that's one of the things that gets taken away from us at an early age, it seems to me, is that we don't even have the right to dream. All we really have the right to do is take care of business. But why do you think we've come to this place where we're even discussing a difference between thriving and surviving?
I think there's several answers to that. And part of it is we've kind of grown up with this mentality, you can do anything you want. But we don't understand the reality of what's behind that in order to do everything we want. The other flip side of that is we are too distracted as a society. When we look back like 30 or 40 years ago, we didn't have a lot of distractions. I mean, I look back even early on in my career, you kind of just go to your job and then go home. You didn't have constant phones or text messages or emails. You could do these other things in your life that you wanted to, or you could pursue other things in your life because your job wasn't a 24-hour day affair. And so we have all these distractions with social media, with information overload, with all this news. We're being bombarded every day with tons of information.
I noticed in your book you say that information actually amounts to something like 174 newspapers worth of information every day.
A day. It's something like 150,000 words a day that, it's not necessarily we're comprehending, but our eyes see, we hear, and what we see in passing through different websites, through different social media feeds or things like that. Essentially, it's 5 times the amount of information we consumed 30 years ago, which our brains, unfortunately, have not developed enough in 30 years to process this amount of information. And what it does is it becomes this back-end overwhelming attitude that we have of constantly being distracted by this information.
Yeah, you call it analysis paralysis.
Yes.
Which means you don't know what to do with all that information.
Correct. Yeah, and we see it a lot, and you probably do it too when you want to buy something new. You kind of go in there and start doing all your research to figure out what you want to buy, and at the end of scrolling for hours on different websites, you're probably more confused than you were if you just would have gone out and bought it and just dealt with the consequences.
I've lived that, absolutely.
I think we all have, and I think that's part of our problem is we have buyer's remorse, or we regret what we did, even though we did all the research.
Lay awake at night wondering if it was the right choice.
Yeah, exactly. And it becomes this burden for us that is unnecessary. And that's kind of what all these distractions and this information has done, is it's causing unbelievable stress. When we look at the statistics of stress, of anxiety, of depression, they are all on the rise, and they're growing at an exponential rate. When we look at teenage suicide, it has doubled in the last 10 years, and it's going to double again in the next 5. And part of it is because our young people, I have 3 teenagers, when I look at them, they are not prepared to deal with this overwhelming information and responsibility and access that they have.
And yet they can't look away either.
No, they can't. I do this thing when I speak a lot. I'll stand up in front of a room and I'll ask everyone to hand me their cell phones. Kind of a joke, but man, the terror you see on people's faces.
Yeah, wait a minute, what?
Like, you're going to take my cell phone? I read this, the review is out of London that in today's world, people feel the same amount of stress and pain of losing their cell phone as being in a terrorist attack. And when you look at that, you're like, this is just kind of a mechanism. Yet we've put so much faith and worth into it. Like, we feel the same experience of having our life threatened. That's a little scary.
It is. And when you think of how fast we've come that far.
Yes.
You and I are of the generation that to talk on the phone at my house when I was a teenager, you had to stand in the kitchen.
Yes.
And so the stress was, can I actually talk to my girlfriend standing here in the middle of the house?
Right.
Right, but it's nothing to compare to what people are dealing with today, and not just kids, but everyone. Everyone has this drive to feel connected and to not be left out of whatever it is that's going on out there on Facebook. And so the anxiety and stress, what are the consequences of those things?
Yeah, so we're seeing high blood pressure, cholesterol, poor eating habits. We're seeing a lot, too, that when you have this stress, when you have this anxiety, and you don't know what to do with it, you have to numb yourself. And so we're even seeing alcohol and drug abuse. And this isn't just people drinking alcohol. This is abuse of alcohol of like 5 to 6 glasses a day. Mm-hmm. We're seeing an increase with, especially with women, up to 95% in the last 5 years. And they can only take it back to we need to numb ourselves because we're so overloaded, we're so stressed, we're so anxious that we don't know what to do about it. And so we turn to overeating, we turn to surfing on social media, we turn to drugs or alcohol or other addictions in order to just numb the pain that we're experiencing. And when I looked at all these statistics, this wasn't something that was trending in a good way. It's trending negatively, and we're not doing anything about it. We're just kind of accepting it as our reality, which is survival mode. And that's not the way we should be living.
Right. And so there are these individual consequences that you have mentioned. Health, anxiety, depression, even leading some people to contemplate suicide.
Correct.
But there are social costs to all of this as well. I mean, all of these people that you're describing collectively form our society.
Absolutely.
They collectively go to the voting booth. They help make decisions in the workplace and at their churches and in their communities. What kind of negative consequences do you see on the broader scale?
I mean, if we looked at 75% of people are stressed right now. So it means even if you aren't, as you mentioned, someone you deal with is. If you're listening to this, you can get on Google and just type in the words, fights at fast food restaurants. And you'll see these overwhelming videos of people like getting in all-out brawls in fast food restaurants. And we're not getting in fights because, we got 4 chicken nuggets instead of 5. It's happening because we're so tightly wound.
Anything that comes along
exactly
triggers us.
That's just the trigger. We are living life so tightly wound. We're so stressed when we get into a fast food restaurant. We lose it. And that should be kind of a warning sign, I think, to us as a society of how we're trending. And you see it, you've seen it really in the last couple of years a lot on social media with news, just the negative attitude that's out there of beating down people, of being negative, of not seeing the positive side of things. And that trends toward an overwhelming issue in society of, always looking at the negative part. If we don't like what's happening in politics or news or society, then we just beat it down instead of trying to find positive alternatives to it. And that negativity is an issue in our lives too. It doesn't produce good. It doesn't produce wellness in our own lives if we're always negative or if we're always seeing the negative side of things. And that's why I think there needs to be something to happen to trend us upward, to trend us in a more positive direction, or else it's going to be chaos, at the ultimate, ending of whatever that might look like in our society.
Right, and so all of that adds up to make this an important issue. This is something that has real consequences in the lives of people and the lives of society. But the question that I have for you is, in your book, do you see this as mostly an outside-in kind of issue? In other words, if you'll just take charge of your diet, take charge of your consumption of technology, slow down on social media, then everything corrects itself. Or do you see it as more of a fundamental inside-out kind of proposition? Is this something we've got to do some internal work to get at thriving and not just surviving?
Yeah, I think that's a great observation because I think it's a little bit of both. As I say in the book, technology is not going to go anywhere. It's something we have to deal with. And so it's almost a daily thing that we have to analyze our lives to figure out how do we want to live life. I know for people like me, growing up or being an adult in this technology revolution, I just kind of accepted everything that came my way. Well, get on Facebook, get on Instagram, start using email, check out this app, check out that app. So I was just consuming and just bringing stuff into my life and on my computer instead of thinking like, okay, how do I want to live my life? And then what apps, what software, what social media thread or news will actually benefit me in trying to achieve that goal? And so we've kind of looked at life backwards and it just accepted the consumerism of all these, all this technology instead of, like you said, kind of take a look in and say, okay, fundamentally, how do I want to live my life? And what is the best diet? What is the best, actions? What is the best exercise? What are the best things that I can bring into that sphere in order to live a more productive and intentional life?
So you can't just buy a Thrival guide kit
No.
that you apply to your life and then everything's fine. You actually have to participate in this process.
Oh, absolutely, because it's all about you. I can tell you what worked for me, and I can give you some things that I think fundamentally can work across the board. But a lot of it comes down to, what do you want to live? How do you want to live life, and what do you want to do with your time? Do you want to spend it on social media and trying to be distracted, or do you want to live in a greater purpose and try to help those around you, or open up, work in a soup kitchen, or have your own podcast, or, write a book? Those things that free up your spirit and free up your time, you've got to do something intentional about it. Because most people you talk to them, they have something inside of them they want to do. And what do we usually say?
Yeah.
Well, I'm busy.
Yeah.
I don't have the time.
Yeah, when I retire, I'll get to that. let's say I sign up for this idea of self-directed thriving.
Mm-hmm.
What's in it for me? In your estimation, what will I see in my life and in my community when I actually embrace this idea and start doing it?
Yeah, and I think, again, that goes back to kind of your individual wants and desires. But the funny thing is when I talk to people about this book is like no one's ever gone, I don't need that. That's not for me. They all, you can all see them sit back and go, oh, yeah, that'd be good. I can see that. And so what you're creating for yourself is you have that stress, that anxiety on top of this desire to do something greater, which I refer to as your Thrival adventure. And so when you kind of clear out all the junk, clear all this, you got tons of stuff in your life you could clear out right now, and you would actually be better off.
Yeah, just think of the average garage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what your life looks like.
Yes.
There's plenty of room to get rid of stuff.
Well, yeah, and I discussed that too. There's more storage facilities in the United States than there are McDonald's because we are just gathering so much stuff and consuming it. For what purpose? If we're buying stuff to keep in a storage facility, why are we buying stuff? And we've bought into this consumerism mentality that you must purchase, you must buy, you must consume in order to be a better person or to make life happy or to make yourself happy.
Yeah, I once helped a friend move, and after nearly breaking every bone in my body and sweating like a madman, getting 3 huge boxes down out of his attic and into the trailer, I asked him, what is in these things? Because they were really heavy. And he said, I don't know. I haven't opened them in the last 3 moves.
Oh, my goodness.
And that has stuck in my mind as so emblematic of how we deal with our stuff. We don't even know what we have.
Right.
But we keep it and we haul it around, and because we might need it someday.
Yeah, and we're chained to this burden of hauling it around for 3 moves, and we don't even know what's in there. When we could probably just don't even look and just throw it out, just drop it off somewhere. Yeah. And don't even bother looking.
Well, you better believe I would not have moved it for him a 4th time.
Yeah, that's true. So it was interesting because I kind of finished this book up about October, November when I was writing it, and then in December we actually had a house fire. I was gone on a business trip down in Phoenix, and I get a call 1:30 in the morning from my wife. The first thing she says is, "We're okay." I'm like, "What's going on?" And it wasn't bad. It was just a small spark out of the fireplace that lit the wood, but it had like smoked out our whole house. So next thing I know, we're out of our house. We're in a rental home. They've come in and taken everything out of our house and to clean it all. And so even now we're still in the rental home. Like, we figured out we probably have about 10% of our actual possessions with us. And the interesting thing about that is with our consumer society is what we've realized is like, wow, we don't need most of what we have.
Because you're doing just fine, right?
Yeah, and we're doing just fine. And it's but we have this mentality of like, I have to consume. I need more. And I'm thinking at this point in my life, like, I don't need that much. And I can be fine. And it was interesting to write about it, then have it kind of forced upon you.
Well, yeah, you had to walk
moment.
the talk there for a bit.
Exactly. So what we can achieve in our own lives, it's kind of like the garage. If you clean out the garage, you get all this great space to do what you intentionally want to do with. You can look at it in your own life. When you clear out all this junk that we get from technology, from information, from all these time killers that we have in our lives, you're clearing out space in your own life to intentionally do with what you want with that space. And that, I think everyone has that desire in their lives if they could just take a step back and realize what is getting in the way of doing that.
And your point is they can do that.
Absolutely they can.
That it's not that hard. And to fill those blanks with things that are life-giving.
Absolutely.
So give me a couple of examples of those. What are you suggesting to people that they replace all these distractions with?
And it goes back to kind of, what's your bent? I mean, for you probably had to move some stuff around to create this radio show and this podcast. It didn't just magically appear and you're like, well, I got these 3 hours in my day. What should I fill that time with? I talk to a lot of people, especially after you write a few books. I mean, everybody has a book in them, it seems like.
That's true.
And they want to write, but again, it goes back, I don't know. I don't have the time to do that. Well, you do have the time. It's just a matter of what are you doing with it. So it could be writing a book, starting a nonprofit. People have to travel more. The experiences are far better than consuming all this stuff that we don't even know what's in our boxes. So it's, again, creating that space for that good stuff in our lives and that thrival adventure that we all desire, we all seek, but we have too much going on that we don't need to.
So there's not a cookie cutter answer there. It's a matter of, what do you want?
Exactly. It is, what do you want to do with your life, and how do you want to live your life with this time that you have here?
Well, that's pretty empowering.
Yeah.
So what's your story, Eric? How did you get to this place where this has become a passion of yours?
I've kind of always had a desire to help people. And a lot of it, for me personally, goes back 20 years ago. I had this hip issue that came up, and I went through this pretty invasive surgery that left me in a body cast for a month. I had to learn how to walk again, but also it didn't do the job and left me in chronic pain. So for 20 years, I've been dealing with chronic pain. And a few years ago, I wrote about it in my first book called The Raging Sloth. And for me, that was a huge distraction. This pain kind of permeated every part of my life.
Well, it would.
And I knew that I had to do something about it. I kept on thinking, one day something's going to get better. One day I'm going to have a magic surgery or, physical therapy or something, and I'll get better. And that day never came, so I had to come to the realization, well, what do I do now? And walking through that, it made me deal with that major distraction of this pain, and how do I live life the way I want to live it with all this pain. In the process of doing that, when I finally dealt with the pain aspect, I realized there was still all these little distractions in my life. And having conversations with people too, when I was kind of going around and talking about that book, they're like, well, I'm not in that place where you are with this pain, but I want to do more, but I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And that kind of started the conversation. And then on top of having 3 teenagers living in the house, I started...
Speaking of distractions.
Exactly. Realizing... that they're on their phones all the time, or they're always looking at the computer, or they always wanted to do something. And it came to a head one night. It was a Friday night. We were watching a movie, and I look around, and everybody, while the movie's going, is like on their phone. And you just think in your head, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way of dealing with this. And that's kind of what prompted that. And I knew it was an issue. I mean, because you can look around and see that it's an issue, that we're so distracted with our phones and social media. But when you start looking at kind of all the numbers and statistics, you realize how bad the issue is. And I don't know if when you're watching the Olympics, they actually did this whole segment on, they have these centers in South Korea, which is kind of where all our technology comes from, where people have to go and detox themselves. I don't know if you saw that or not.
Yeah, they've recognized that this is actually an addiction.
Right.
And these are detox centers where you go and you turn in your cell phone and all your devices, and you essentially learn how to think without them again.
Yeah, how to live life without all the technology around you.
Yeah. Well, and now we're starting to hear reports from people who were instrumental in developing a lot of these social media platforms, people who were on the ground floor of making Facebook what it is, and they're starting to come out with almost public confessions that say, this is not just neutral. We've actually created these things with dopamine production in mind. In other words, the very neurochemicals that make us feel good. This is a big deal.
Well, it is, and you see it. We've seen it with Apple executives. We've seen it with board members from Apple, and you also see it. There's a school, a private school in Silicon Valley where most of the technology executives send their kids, and there's no technology at this school.
That ought to tell you what you need to know.
Exactly. If it's not good enough for their own children, why should it be good enough for our children? And you heard it, I think Bill Gates talked about, and his wife talked about how restricted they were with their children as they were growing up with technology too. And if you're hearing it kind of from the horse's mouth, then what should we take away from that if it's not good enough for their own children or the people that they're around, yet we are consuming it on a constant and consistent basis?
And being horribly distracted by it.
Exactly. Bill Gates never could have been as successful as he was if he was distracted as we are now by his own inventions. So,
right.
So,
well, I like how you open the book because you mentioned that the evidence that this is true for most of us is present in how we greet each other. Mm-hmm. I say, "Hey, Eric, how's it going?" And your response is,
"I'm busy."
Or I'm getting by.
Yeah.
I'm surviving. I'm still here.
Yeah.
These are pretty bleak ways to describe our lives.
Yeah.
So it's built into our language and how we talk to each other. What would you expect to hear from somebody who's got this Thrival adventure thing down? I say, hey, Eric, how are you?
You say, I am awesome. You probably know, we all know probably one or two people like that.
That answer that way.
Yeah, every time you see it, they're like, I am doing great. But what is your reaction when you hear someone say that, like as a response?
Well, sometimes I wonder what's wrong with you, right?
Yeah.
No, I want to know more.
Right.
I want to know why. What's going on with you that makes you so bright and happy today?
What did he figure out that I didn't? Or what does she know that I don't know?
Yeah.
There's something engaging about that when we see someone who's kind of figured it out, someone who's kind of left the corporate world or left the rat race and kind of off and doing their own thing. We're drawn to that on a certain level because we want something like that. We want that type of freedom, or want that type of ability to control our lives.
Living the Thrival adventure is kind of contagious.
Well, I think it is. You asked me earlier kind of in my own life what those are. And for me, it's I run a summer camp for kids 1 week out of the year and over the summer for children who've lost their fathers in military service. Me and my family just got back from a week in Peru where we were working with an orphanage that we've worked with for about the last 8 years. If I was so distracted and I was so living my life that I was in the corporate rat race going 90 miles an hour, I wouldn't have time for these things. And being able to impact these kids and be able to write books and be able to speak to people about this, that's what gets me alive. That's what makes me, happy and enjoy life. And instead of just spending the time on social media going, oh, my life stinks. Why is everyone else's better than mine? How come they get to go on vacation and I don't? It's those type of things that, stop asking why. Stop asking, how to do it and start doing it.
Yeah,
and,
whatever that means for you.
Right. And there's some easy things you can do in clearing out your email box and unsubscribing from all those emails you get. Turn off notifications on your phone. You don't need to be notified every time someone wants to get a hold of you. Stop letting other people
or
dictate
post
your
a picture
schedule.
of themselves eating dinner.
Exactly. Post their latest meal up on social media. Limit your time on social media. Limit your time that you scroll the internet. Stop watching the news or listening to the news so much. Whatever it may be, that's kind of, when you look at your life, you look at your day and how you're spending your time. What is that stuff that you can get rid of and is not going to make any difference in your life?
Yeah.
Start looking for those things.
And your book, The Thrival Guide, is full of suggestions like this. Where can people get a copy?
So they can get a copy on Amazon or at ericpeaton.com and barnesandnoble.com as well.
All right. Well, Eric, I'm glad that you had enough foresight to clear your life of distraction to write this book.
Well, thank you, Alan, and thank you for having me here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Think Radio is supported by the Gunnison Country Times, Gunnison's locally owned hometown newspaper, and by listeners like you. To find out how you can become a Think Radio supporter, visit kbut.org. Think Radio is a production of Alan Mortis Media. To contact Alan, visit alanmortismedia.com.
Thanks for listening. Join me next week for another great conversation on Think Radio.